very much.
Thank you and good morning. Yeah, I'm Christina. She ducked my surname, most people do. My name is Christina Grzasko. I am the founder and product development director of Anya Designs Limited. I am also half asleep, so I apologise in advance for everything that goes wrong, because 9 o'clock in the morning is not a good time for me. Anya Designs Limited is a software company that I founded in 1996. I came to it as a result of a number of pivots, because I did what we all know how to do, which is change track constantly in our lives. And that's the thing about pivoting, which is the subject for today. I come from Liverpool. I'm a Scouser. Sorry about that. I'm a musician, and in my various guises I have done things like defending murderers. In fact, I've defended 5 of them, and 3 of them were convicted. So I have come a long way. I have done some pivoting to even get to being founder and product development director. How did I get there? What happened? Well, a number of things, and they were mostly accidental. As I say, I started off doing criminal defence work. I did an honours degree in law, and that was a backup plan because I wanted to set up a band and I wanted to be a rock star. You can probably tell that failed. So law was the backup plan, and I did that quite successfully for several years. But the thing about law is that, particularly the branch that I was involved in, is that you spend a lot of time doing nothing. You're on call to the police station, so you're awake through the night quite a lot, or you're down the police station waiting for things to happen. And so you acquire random hobbies to keep you occupied, to keep you awake. And one of the things that I started doing, well, the first thing I did in 1995, seems like a very long time ago, was I joined the BBC Networking Club. I had no ability with computers at all. Actually, I didn't even have a computer, but I didn't let that put me off. I borrowed, I begged, whatever, got interested in it. So arguably that was my first pivot, because as a result of that, I started to learn how to code, which was what I was doing in the down hours at night, was working out how to make things work because it seemed more interesting. And as a result of all of those pivots, I am now here today to talk to you about how to pivot. And it's a skill that everybody's got, actually. I suspect it's the skill that brought you here, because whatever you're doing here today, I suspect, is not the first thing that you chose to do. And that's worth exploring perhaps later on between us. So once I'd started to learn to code, what then happened was, quite accidentally, I set up a company. And the very, very first thing that the company did turned out to be reasonably successful. There was, I can't imagine many of you remember this, but the very first PDA was something called a Cyan 5. Do you remember it? And I had one which I was using at court to take notes of hearings that I was involved in. And what happened was, the big books that you need when you're out and about, and they're huge, you need a team of Sherpas to get you anywhere, and somebody would nick it anyway. I wanted to get onto one of these, which, with the benefit of hindsight, was a really, really stupid idea because nobody had ever done it before. But the joy of being new into the territory, and it being new territory as well, was I didn't really stop and think about the practicality of this. So I went to the publishers and said, look, I've got this really great idea, right? I can get your books into one of them. And they said, wow, that's tremendous, go and do it. So I did then, because I was committed and I had a deal to go and do it. And we produced, I did get help, I wasn't quite that stupid, but we produced large books in the Cyan 5 format, took it to market, had a business, had to build the business around it to be able to do the selling, to be able to make the contracts and everything else. Unfortunately, once that had got going and everything was going very well, as there seems to be the pattern in the markets that I've gone into, something seismic happened, and Cyan crashed. It crashed for a number of reasons, mostly because Microsoft started their first foray into the palm top market, but also because the company itself wasn't particularly well run. So having just got a taste for being in business and actually having customers, we then had to very quickly actually do something about it. Now, fortunately, by that stage, because I had been tinkering, I had a case management application, which we'd started building. And one of the publishers who had been interested in doing a deal with us for the Scion books said, well, have you got anything else? Because we quite like working with you. And I'm like, well, I've got this application thing, but you do books, you don't do databases. And they said, no, it's fine. Actually, it's 2000. You know, we've seen computers. We can imagine taking total control of our customers' desktops. So let's talk. So the second pivot that, the first pivot was actually to take us from the Scion books into the case management markets. Now, case management, just by way of explanation, because it won't mean very much to most people, it's not a sexy application. It's a very big modular program. And if you think enterprise resource planning, ERP software, you're probably getting close to what this does. What we've actually built over the last 14 years is software which enables lawyers to handle their cases, their finances, their regulatory issues. It's very big software. The second, so we got into a joint venture. The second pivot came when that joint venture came to an end in 2005. And we had to stand on our own 2 feet, and we had to reimagine the product as what it is today, which is iLaw, and find its market. The third pivot that we did, which was actually tangential and a story for another day, took that system into retail and became a merchandising system which operated behind 400 branches of warehouse and Debenhams on the high street. The point I'm trying to make at this stage, I think, before I go into too much more detail, is that it's two things, I think. Pivoting happens a lot in business. It's actually a skill that you need to get your head around. And also, it tends to happen in such a way that you're always working backwards. There's an event, you respond. There's an event, you respond all the time. But you're using skills, actually, and I only realised this by about the third pivot. You're using skills you've got because you do this in your life anyway when things don't go to plan. And the trick is to kind of realise that and to deal with it in the same way. So to bring it up to date, iLaw found its niche with legal aid lawyers. These are lawyers that work for people who cannot afford legal representation, and it's part of the welfare state. And in March of last year, the government announced they were going to slash the legal aid budgets. And in doing so, the proposals that they put in front of us were going to cut legal aid lawyers in this country by 75%, and in doing so would muller our market by the same 75%. Now that's quite a drastic position for a business to be in. And the first thing that happened was I got very cross, and I contacted the Law Society to see what they were doing about it, and they weren't at that stage. But anyway, they came back to me, and I ended up being seconded to the Law Society, first to try and fight the Ministry of Justice with regard to these proposals, because they were putting potentially us out of business as well as our clients, and their clients weren't going to get the service that they needed. Unfortunately, we lost. We lost because there aren't that many votes in this subject, and because this government is determined to cut welfare state. That's it. It's just one of those things that happens. And so I found this out in February of this year, which means in February, the business was staring its future really down the barrel of a gun, which said, in June 2015, with utter precision, 75% of our market will disappear. 75% of our current customers will disappear. And we won't be able to go out to market and find any more for this particular product. And because this is the mainstay, this is a product that's earned us, you know, at least £3 million in the last 3 years. That's kept the business going, obviously. There's 9 of us, and it's kept, and it's meant we've been able to do what we want to do. And you look at that and you think, okay, what am I going to do with this? Because now I'm going to have to pivot. There's a number of things. The first thing you do is you go, oh shit, pardon the French, but that's exactly what you do. The very first stage in dealing with a pivot of any sort is to recognise that there is an emotional response to it first and foremost, and you have to deal with that. Every time we've pivoted the business, and again this year, I've had to deal with the fact that personally, despite all the instincts and the wisdom that I've got, I feel threatened and I feel annoyed and I feel sad and I feel angry and I don't want to do this and I want everything to stay the same. Old Zen story, which I remind myself of every single time this happens. There was a king whose subjects were getting very entitled and were getting very lazy, and he decided, stuff this, I'm going to show them the value of what they've got. So he sent them all off out of the village, and he put a very, very big boulder, about one that size, in front of the entrance to the village. Now, obviously, this is a story we have to remember. There's probably lots of entrances, but for the purpose of this story, that's it. And he waited for them to come back. He hid behind the rock, and he waited for them to come back to see what they would do. And most of them either looked at it and walked away, or prodded it, kicked it, swore a bit, cursed, whatever, and then walked away. And he was quite disappointed by this. That tends to be, of course, people's first reactions when faced with an obstacle if it's very, very big. Again, because it's a story, trolling down the road comes this peasant who's got no investment in anything, sees the rock, kicks it, pushes it, can't make any headway, thinks about it, sees the forest, goes and gets a big stick, fashions it into a lever, gets the rock out of the way. Finds underneath it two things: bag of gold, which is always useful, and a note. I always think the notes are a bit of a stage pompous thing in these things, but the message was absolutely important. The obstacle is the path. And that's the first thing that I think I always have to remind myself when it comes to pivoting a business. The path that I wanted, the path that I planned for, the path I expected to have in front of me is the one that rarely appears at the end of the day. And I know this. I shouldn't allow myself to get so comfortable sometimes, because the path with a business is always got obstacles in it, and you're always having to get around them. So actually, and this is something I only learnt with the benefit of hindsight, but you have to get used to pivoting. You have to get used to having obstacles in front of you, because that's the only path you're ever going to see. The other thing that I have learnt is that you always have a choice. And again, I have to remind myself, it may be very different for other people, but my experience is always this: to remember you have a choice. You can walk away. So in this particular instance, I can take a decision to say, well, look, I know that the end date is June 2015. It's really actually quite precise. I can close the business down as elegantly as possible and make sure that the remaining customers are handed over to somebody else, that my staff get long notice that they can go and find another job, and I can just walk away saying enough is enough on this project. That is a valid choice. I can sulk. I did quite a lot of sulking, not for the first time in my career. You can also go and get spectacularly drunk as well, and you can do 101 other things. You can go on shopping sprees and everything. It is an option. The third option is to find a plan. In fact, several plans, B, C, D, all the way through to Z. Think up as many crazy ideas as you can, and see whether or not there's a plan which makes sense, which enables you to stay in the space. And that's the moment of pivot. That's the moment when you engage with the obstacle, when you say, right, I know you're there, and I think I want to do this, but I just don't know how to do it. But it's, as I said to you a few minutes ago, it's really, really important to honour the emotion, to honour the stages every time you face the point at which you've got to pivot. Now, just as a tangential on this, before I go further, of course, for me, the point of pivot this time is really obvious. But there are times when actually it's not so obvious. And again, that's happened to me with this business. So how do you know it's time to pivot? How do you know that you should be honouring a process or even thinking about it? And the only answer, and I've been asked that a lot over the years, and the only sensible answer I can ever come up with is if it isn't working, if something doesn't feel right, if something isn't happening, that's the point at which you've got to think about pivoting. That's your nudge. It is because something undefinable is not right. When you actually, when you wake up or when you switch off and you're thinking about it, something else is nagging you. So even if you don't have a big obstacle like the one that Anya's been facing over the last few months, but that feeling, that sense, trust your instincts always. because as much as logic, as much as any of us can give you advice, one of the biggest assets you've got as a business person is your instinct, because actually you're really immersed in this stuff. You're immersed in your product, your market, your people and everything else. So if something feels off, it probably is off. So again, acknowledge it, honour it, listen to it, and then say, does this need a small pivot? Does it need a big pivot? How do I feel about this? So my experience and the things that I've learnt through time applies equally to the really big oh shit moments and to the things where things just, they're not right, it's not working, it's not happening. And then finally, after honouring the emotion, looking at the choices, this is the most important thing to remember. If I could impart one piece of advice, if I could have known this when I first started out, my life would have been possibly simpler. And that is this: you aren't your business idea. That means quite simply that you have to be able to separate the two things, because the problem with pivoting, and where most people come unstuck, is that they stay emotionally wedded to that idea. They are the idea is them. This idea in its current manifestation is an expression of who you are. It's your, the psychoanalyst would call it your ideation point. This is a statement of who I am at the moment and what I want to achieve. And because it is, and because you get so emotionally wedded to it, you forget that, no, that's not actually very true. And you have to be able to work through the emotion and get to the point where you can say, I'm now going to look at this really clearly and see if that's true. And I'm going to look at this and see if the market wants what I've got. Because actually, eventually, you get to the point with running a business when you realise that what you are is an entrepreneur and you have ideas. If we were all our business idea, then we get stuck. We'd be one-hit wonders all the time. We wouldn't be able to think of anything else. We wouldn't be able to pivot. We wouldn't be able to just move on and say, well, look, I had this brilliant idea and it was great, but it wasn't successful. So that's it, but I can't let it go because it is me and I am it, and it's all very confusing. Now, what you do is you say, I had this great idea. It hasn't worked because of all of these things, and I can see that because I can separate away from it, and I can do a 360-degree review of it. And then I can come back to it and say, these things are good. I can learn from these things, or I can take these things with me. These things actually aren't so good, and what was I thinking of, really? So, you aren't your business idea. That's really, really important. And as a result of that, once you manage that trick, and I'm not pretending it's easy, as I say, I wish I'd known it quite a lot earlier than I did, you realise that the ability to separate yourself, the ability to pivot, is probably the most essential tool in your kit bag. I said to you earlier, you listen to your instinct and you say, what do I do next? Because if you can't do it, yes, you are a one-hit wonder, and maybe not a very big hit either whilst you're at it. And you're on a fast track to a muck job. So actually, you've got to learn not to fear it as well. Indeed, you've got to hope that you get to your first pivot point quite fast, so that you start learning, you start thinking, you start that process of separation from your first idea. Because the other thing, and the benefit of this, is that you realise actually, again, with the benefit of hindsight, is that your second, third, fourth, 10th, 20th idea were even better. Hurrah, who knew? Actually, when I look at the software we were designing 10 years ago, it's scarily naff. We have customers ring us up and they say, well, we've still got CaseKeeper from 2000. And we're thinking, really? And they're going, yeah, no, we can't, we've got a problem with it. So you do a remote and you look at it and you think, Christ, I actually designed that. And I thought that was amazing. And now, because of all the pivots and the places have been forced to, what we do now, I think, is totally awesome. And I'm ashamed of that. But for that person, it still works. But the ability to pivot fearlessly means you move on. Once you've separated yourself from the idea, I am not iLaw in this instance. Sorry for clouting the mic. I am not iLaw in this instance. And the same applies for the whole business, for all 10 of us. Where do you go to next to solve this out? Well, what I did is what I always did. is to start to be clear about these things. You know this stuff. I'd be amazed if you haven't spent hours discussing this in all the time that you've been here. You need to ask yourself, okay, I've got over being angry, I've got over sulking about this, I've decided I'm going to go for option 3, which is make a plan, make several of them. Where do I want to go? And crucially, can I answer these 2 questions about anything that I'm going to be taking on next? What does this group of potential customers want? And what pain would they pay us money to get rid of? Because ultimately that's what we're all doing. However much we believe in what we're doing and how much we want to be what we're doing, if we can't persuade people to part with cash, we won't be doing it for very long. And so always you need to come back to this default set of questions. They're actually quite uncomfortable questions. These are the more comfortable ones. How cool do you think my current idea is? And do you like the extra bits we chucked on as a truly excellent idea after a long night down at the pub? I've included a picture of a furry hula hoop. It came up in one of the team meetings that we were having. We were doing a bit of a blast of ideas. And one of my team, who decided that what we do is we get involved in apps, decided that there was no app which actually you could track the amount of revs per minute round your waist of a hula hoop. And we thought he was joking. So we started designing the hula hoop, and we came up with this really blingy, furry hula hoop. And unfortunately, he wasn't. He was a bit pissed at the time, but he wasn't joking. And he got quite upset when we all fell about laughing. And that's the problem if you get too invested in your idea. But it was, you know, it was also a lesson to me about remembering that sometimes when you think people are joking, they're not. So what did I do? Well, I've spent the last few months doing a stock check of everything that we've got. And again, this is the process of the pivot. Finally, when you're making your plans, you start with where you are. What have you got? What's the experience you've had to date? Have you got customers? Have you got any reusable code? Have you got any reusable marketing materials? I hate to sound callous about this, but do you have reusable staff stroke skills within the business? Because that's something you have to factor in, and a lot depends on where you're heading. And of course, the big things. Do we have any money? And if we do, how do we spin it out? As a tangent from this, the last 15 years, my business objective has been to not owe the banks any money. Of all the things that I have done that I am proud of, and there are a few, not being in the pay of the bank is the things I am most proud of. Because with the exception of the initial loan, which my very kind and lovely father made to me to get the business off the ground, I repaid that after 2 years, and we have never had any bank lending or any other lending since. It isn't easy. It's a discipline. You have to do things that you know, you have to make tins of beans last when you're hungry, and you have to pay everybody else before yourself, and you have to make sure that people like HMRC are paid on time, because if you don't, they are own goals. You shoot yourself in the foot. You give somebody the ability to crash across your parade. Suddenly, your decisions when you're pivoting and when you're running your business are governed by who is banging on your door this month for money, who is actually breathing down your neck, and you get bent and out of shape and you can't make the right decisions. It's not impossible. It is very, very difficult, but that's why I'm proud of it, and the whole business has always had the mission to do that. Which means that at this moment of total catastrophe, I at least didn't have to worry about paying the bank back. And a new HMRC was up to date, so they're not going to be banging on my door for VAT or for PAYE or anything like that. And this is what I worked out. Customers, yes, we still have some, hurrah. 25% of them will not disappear. It's a start. Staff, yes, we definitely have some, and they're very talented. Reusable code, bucket loads of it, completely. Things that we never brought to market, things that we did, things that we can reimagine. We got, a bit like your Lego bricks, we got it all out on the table, and we've been working out what we can do with it. We've been looking at adjacent markets. We've been looking at where we can take our experience. Desire within the business to change, trickier one. At the moment and for the last few months, both I and my team have been periodically terrified and exhilarated by the prospect of being able to change things, because within this is the ability to do things that we thought we could never do. As a by the by, we've also spent a lot of time playing Cluedo, and the reason we're playing Cluedo is because we think that our next foray into this market is going to be in the area of digital trials, and that's the thing that we're trialling at the moment. And Cluedo, believe it or not, is an amazing place to start when you're talking about digital trials. And then finally, and the point that I reached literally only about 2 months ago, was this question: what has to give in order for the whole to survive? And again, it's a question which applies equally to me with a mature business as it applies to you at the beginning of this particular iteration of your business. Well, our current business model will probably have to go, and we're busy ripping that one up at the moment. And I say it with apparent calmness. Inside of me, there's a little voice screaming, going, we've no idea what's going to replace it. But at the moment, I'm sitting on that. Our current assumptions about what we do, well, actually, they went fairly early on. They had to enable us to make the choice that it was going to be, we were going to go for it. But never our freedom in how we do it, and it's important to hang on to that. If I go back to what I was saying to you earlier about, yes, I understand that the business feels like you and you feel like the business, and it's you putting yourself out there. No, you need to separate yourself from that, but never ever separate yourself from the idea of freedom, choice, how we do this, whether this represents me. When you go and talk to your customers like I did, one of the things you need to ask yourself is, what you want, do I want? Because if I don't want it, it doesn't matter how good a business idea, we're not going to do it properly because I'm not interested in it, and I'm not going to care about it. You've always got the freedom to make those choices. Because how we interpret our lives, our perspective, our framework, ultimately it comes down to if we get our own interpretations right, and we've managed to do that firstly through the emotional curve and then through the utterly objective curve, because we've stepped away from it being our idea, determines our response, indeed whether there will be one or whether we're just going to lie there and we're going to take what fate's chucking at us. And I don't believe in taking what fate chucks at me. This is a Terry Pratchett quote, and I think it's one that I've always had written somewhere. It is better to light a flamethrower than curse the darkness. That's why I fought the legal aid changes before I changed my business, because I wanted to be able to say at the end of the day, yeah, I did it my way. I tried. I didn't just sit there and let it happen. So to bring this to a conclusion, really, our position at the moment is that I think we've got new directions to go in. And the process that we're going to take is change or pivot. We've honoured all the steps, we've honoured the emotional responses, we've honoured the choices, we've made them, we've determined where we're going to go. We don't know if we're right, but then you never have that certainty. So it's best to dispense with it, because what you're actually engaged in is a process which will take you, well, actually you don't really know where. I mean, we can pretend to have plans and we can have 5-year projections and we can do all these things that we need to do to show somebody else that we know what the hell is going on. But the truth of it is, we don't really, they're best guesses. So you pivot, you improve what you can, you fight what you need to, and then you learn and enjoy the ride. And that's it really, that's the way it goes.